There is a Sumerian text called Lugal-e. The name translates as O Warrior King. It survives on clay tablets dating to approximately 2000 BC, and it is housed across multiple museum collections, including the electronic text Corpus of Sumerian literature, maintained by the University of Oxford. It is 728 lines long. It describes a war, not a war between cities, not a war between kings, a war between a god, Wood, and a mountain. The god is Ninurta, son of Enlil, god of war and of spring thunder showers. The weapon he carries has a name, Sharur. In Sumerian, the word means smasher of thousands. The text describes Sharur not as a simple mace or club, but as something that can fly across vast distances without impediment, something that can communicate with its wielder, something that gathers intelligence and reports back before battle begins. A weapon that flies, a weapon that speaks, a weapon that scouts ahead. Written on clay nearly 4,000 years ago. When Ninurta uses Sharur against his enemy, the text describes what happens to the landscape. Mountains are crushed, stone is pulverized. The earth itself is reshaped. The destruction is not described in vague mythological terms. It is described in physical terms. Pressure, crushing, pulverization. The same vocabulary Sumerian scribes used for construction and demolition in administrative records. There is a valley in the Austrian Alps where the ground shows exactly what that kind of destruction looks like. Köfels sits in the Ötztal Valley in Tyrol. The valley contains a landslide that has puzzled geologists since the 19th century. It is approximately 500 meters thick, 5 kilometers in diameter. The volume of displaced rock is estimated at roughly 3 cubic kilometers. That is enough material to bury a modern city under a quarter mile of rubble. In the mid-20th century, geologists concluded it must have been caused by a massive meteor impact. The evidence included crushing pressures and signs of explosive force that no ordinary landslide could explain. But there was a problem. There was no impact crater. And by the late 20th century, as scientists developed a much better understanding of what impact sites look like, the meteor hypothesis fell out of favor. Köfels was reclassified as a landslide. Case closed, except it was not closed. The crushing pressures remained unexplained. The explosive signatures remained unexplained. The sheer scale of the event remained unexplained. A landslide 5 kilometers wide and 500 meters deep does not simply happen without a cause proportional to the effect. In 2008, Alan Bond and Mark Hempsell at the University of Bristol published a book called A Sumerian Observation of the Köfels Impact Event. They had spent years working on the Planisphere tablet, catalog number K8538, in the British Museum. A clay disc covered in astronomical observations arranged in 8 segments. When they used computer software to match the star positions and trajectory data on the tablet to the ancient night sky, they arrived at a date, June 29th, 3123 BC, and a trajectory. The trajectory described an object entering the atmosphere at a very low angle, 6 degrees, traveling across what is now the Middle East and clipping a mountain called Gamskogel above the town of Langenfeld, 11 kilometers from Köfels. The low angle explains why there is no crater. The object did not hit the ground as a solid body. It clipped the mountain and exploded. It became a fireball approximately 5 kilometers in diameter, the exact size of the landslide. When the fireball reached the valley floor, it created enormous pressures that pulverized the rock. But because the object was no longer solid, it did not leave a classic impact crater. Bond and Hempsell calculated the object was over 1 kilometer in diameter, an Aten-type asteroid whose orbit was resonant with Earth's orbit around the Sun. But the trajectory does not end at Köfels. The explosion produced a back plume, a mushroom cloud, that was bent by the curvature of its trajectory over the Mediterranean Sea. The plume re-entered the atmosphere over the Levant and northern Egypt. Mark Hempsell stated that the ground heating from the plume, although very brief, would have been sufficient to ignite any flammable material, including human hair and clothing. More people may have died under the plume than in the Alps from the initial blast. This needs to be said clearly. The Bond-Hempsell hypothesis is contested. The landslide at Köfels has been radiocarbon dated to approximately 9,500 years before present. A study by Nicolussi and colleagues published in Geomorphology in 2015 refined the date to from 9,527 to 9,498, calibrated years before present. That is roughly 6,000 years earlier than the date Bond and Hempsell propose. Some geologists maintain the landslide can be explained by deep creep mechanisms without any impact event. But here is what is not contested. The landslide exists. The crushing pressures exist. The explosive signatures exist. Approximately 3 cubic kilometers of displaced rock sits in the Ötztal Valley right now. You can go to Köfels. You can stand on it. The debate is about what caused it. The evidence that something extraordinary happened there is not in dispute. The Lugal-e describes a weapon that crushes mountains and pulverizes stone. Köfels contains a site where a mountain was crushed and stone was pulverized across a radius of 5 kilometers. The Planisphere tablet contains trajectory data that, when processed through modern software, points directly at that valley. 3 separate artifacts: a mythological text, an astronomical record, a geological formation, all pointing at the same location. The Sumerians did not use the word weapon casually. In their administrative texts, weapons were cataloged with the same precision as grain stores and labor records. The Lugal-e does not describe Sharur as a metaphor. It describes it as an object with specific capabilities: flight, communication, reconnaissance, destruction at a scale that reshapes terrain. Modern weapons that fly and communicate and scout ahead and reshape terrain exist. We call them cruise missiles. We call them drones. We call them guided munitions. The specific combination of capabilities attributed to Sharur, autonomous flight plus communication plus targeted destruction, maps precisely onto weapon systems that were developed in the 20th century. The standard academic interpretation is that Sharur is a literary personification. Ancient peoples gave human qualities to objects as a storytelling device. The mace talks because the poet wanted it to talk. It flies because mythology allows things to fly. That is a reasonable interpretation, and it should not be dismissed. But reading the Lugal-e alongside the Planisphere tablet alongside the geological evidence at Köfels produces a convergence that literary interpretation alone does not account for. The Sumerians described a weapon that flies and destroys mountains. A tablet records the trajectory of an object that flew across the sky and struck a mountain. A valley in Austria contains the physical remains of a mountain that was destroyed. The literary interpretation says the weapon is a metaphor. The trajectory says an object was real. The geology says something struck. There are other Sumerian weapons in the textual record. The Tablet of Destinies, described as conferring supreme authority on whoever possesses it. The texts say it was stolen from Enlil by the Anzu bird and recovered by Ninurta using Sharur. The Mi, divine decrees that functioned as portable units of knowledge and power. Inanna is described as stealing them from Enki and transporting them physically by boat. These are not vague references to spiritual concepts. They are described as objects, objects that can be carried, objects that can be stolen, objects that confer specific capabilities on their holders. Cross-cultural parallels exist. The Mahabharata, the ancient Indian epic, describes weapons called astras that are launched through spoken command and produce effects consistent with nuclear detonation. The Brahmastra is described as producing a flash brighter than 1,000 suns and leaving the land barren for generations. Robert Oppenheimer quoted a passage from this text after witnessing the first nuclear test at Trinity in 1945. He chose those words not because they were poetic, he chose them because they were accurate. The Vimanas described in the Ramayana and other Sanskrit texts are aerial vehicles with specific dimensions and specific fuel sources. They carry weapons, they fly in formation. They are described with the same technical matter-of-factness that Sumerian scribes applied to Sharur. Two ancient civilizations on opposite sides of the world independently described weapons that fly and destroy cities and reshape landscapes. The standard explanation is independent mythological invention. Two separate cultures imagined similar things because human imagination follows similar patterns. NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office currently tracks over 32,000 near-Earth objects. For objects 1 kilometer in diameter and larger, the size Bond and Hempsell calculated for the Köfels impactor, coverage is approximately 95%. But for objects between 50 and 140 meters, coverage drops below 10%. The DART mission in 2022 demonstrated that asteroid deflection is theoretically possible. But deflection requires detection, and detection requires time. For objects in the size range that could destroy a city, the warning window can be weeks or nothing at all. The Sumerians described a weapon that came from the sky and crushed a mountain. Modern planetary defense confirms that objects capable of exactly that effect reach Earth's vicinity regularly. The question is not whether the ancients described something real. The question is whether they described something they witnessed. Köfels is open to visitors. The Ötztal Valley is accessible by road from Innsbruck. The landslide is visible from satellite imagery. The Planisphere tablet is in the British Museum. The Lugal-e is translated and available through the electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature at Oxford. The weapon the Sumerians described left a mark. The mark is still there. Approximately 3 cubic kilometers of crushed rock in an alpine valley, 5 kilometers wide, 500 meters deep, waiting for someone to explain how it got there.